Club in 1999. He's had every job except treasurer, and since can't balance his own checkbook. He will never be treasurer again in any club. He's working on either his second bronze or his silver communication manual, I believe. Please welcome Jim Briggs, Confession of a Scrumpter.
Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, Mr. President, just kidding. This has probably happened to you during table topics. Last spring, our topic was, what's your favorite summertime activity? And I felt like jumping up and saying, call on me, because I know exactly what my favorite summertime activity is. It's scrumping. I am a scrumper. What's that? You'll see. We took our really good friends with us to Hawaii. And we got off the plane and I very brazenly announced that I knew the location of every single mango tree on the island of Kauai that grew on public land or close to public land. Now mangoes are really expensive in Hawaii, and I thought, hey, why buy them when they grow on trees? We'd be driving along and I'd say, stop the car. And we'd jump out and I'd grab up a bunch of mangoes. Or I spent more time on the golf course hunting mangoes than I did lost golf balls. And our friend, who was from England originally, says, Jim, you are nothing but a scrumper. And I tried to look it up, and I couldn't even find it in the dictionary. But I think from the context, a scrumper is somebody who forages for food anywhere but in his own yard. Now, Hawaii may be famous for mangoes, but Central Washington is not too shaggy when it comes to fruit. And I know where all the public fruit is. Right across the street from our hospital in Ellensburg, there's a great Bing cherry tree. Hangs out right over the fence. And right next to it's an apple tree, and they're just about ripe right now. Up on Rodeo Hill, there's a marvelous apricot tree, and it's on parkland, or at least that's what I'll tell the cops if they stop me. And if you go to the Yakima Treaty Day celebration down in Toppenish, between where you park your car and where you stand in line for the salmon, there's a bunch of cherry trees, and you can just graze as you're moving along trying to get up to the salmon. My wife is so concerned that I'm going to get busted one of these days doing this. She said, Jim, why don't you just plant fruit trees in your own garden? Well, the truth is, I hate gardening. I spent my career as an extension agent, agricultural extension agent, helping people keep varmints and diseases and things out of their garden, and I made the conclusion that it's not worth it. But that doesn't mean I hate plants. I love plants, wild plants. When we first moved to New York, I joined a local naturalist club. And they used to have daily or weekly outings, and there was one lady that was always picking up weeds and wild plants, and she'd take them home and cook them up for her family. And I spent enough time with her, I got so I could identify the plants, so I tried it. And I used to take home stuff and cook for my own kids. And I actually got them to eat lamb's quarters and milkweed, provided I fixed it with a really, really thick and rich cream sauce. Well, I got to thinking, I could get some mileage out of this. And so I made up a slideshow based on my outings of all the wild plants. And I started showing it around the county as part of my job. And it was working out pretty well, especially because just about that time, there was a guy named Yule Gibbons wrote a book called Stalking the Wild Asparagus. And he was in the vanguard of the Back to Nature movement of the 70s. Well, he was quite a celebrity. He was on the talk show circuit talking about foraging for foods. And he was okay until he finally sold out and started pitching for grape nuts on TV. Then he became the darling of the late night TV because you recall his expression, tastes like wild hickory nuts. That became a really standing joke on whoever was the Jay Leno of those days. Well, this sort of trickled down to my program and it created a lot of interest. People started calling on me to give this talk. And this provided the single most rewarding moment of my whole career as an extension agent. I was asked by my boss to speak to the Windsor, New York Senior Citizens Club. And I really didn't want to do it because the guy I worked with had gone the week before and he says, it's horrible. Those old people, they can't hear, they interrupt you, they talk to each other. He said it was not a fun experience. So I didn't want to go very bad, but I had to. So I showed up with my trusty carousel projector, and I walked in, and I felt about that big. Those old people had gone out and collected all the wild foods that they had used over the years. And I said, how arrogant of me to myself to propose to tell them about wild foods. These people went through the Depression. They went through World War II when it was really hard to get food. And they actually lived on this stuff. And I'm trying to tell them. So I just slid my projector under the table and went around, and they told me about the stuff that they lived on. And they told me how to identify it and, most importantly, how to cook it. So I was able to infuse that stuff back into my program. And I'd like to think that they enjoyed having some young person that would listen to what they had to say. So I was all energized. I got back to the office and I looked through the files, and I found an old Cornell rural school leaflet, Edible Wild Foods. It was published in 1943, the year I was born, and naturally it was out of print. But we had this super secretary in the office, and she typed that whole bulletin up on ditto sheets. You know what ditto sheets are? You don't see them anymore, but that was a big job, and we made up bulletins that I handed out when I went out. And so that's pretty much how my career went as far as edible wild foods went. But there was one thing I never did, and that was mess with mushrooms. People would bring mushrooms in, and I'd say, I'm sorry, but Cornell does not have enough insurance for me to tell you how to identify mushrooms. They're hard to tell, and you only get one mistake. Now, I am intrigued with these morels that supposedly grow in Washington. But that is how I became a scrumper, and it gives you an idea of what scrumping is. And if we ever have table topics in this club, next spring, be sure and call on me. I'll tell you how to make maple syrup by tapping your neighbor's trees. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you.